What I would like to do is actually to say something about the global scale. And at the global scale, at the moment, a lot of attention is on the Sustainable Development Goals that will have a sort of a mid-term assessment in 2023. And the other one is on climate change. And there, with the upcoming meeting in Glasgow that is starting this week, actually, there's a lot of issues that I think are also important for the region on the table. So I do think that all those challenges are interrelated. And I think that if you look at the drivers, the important drivers are things like population growth, but connected to that economic growth and urbanization, and climate change, where we're then talking about rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns that are also very important for the region of the upper part of the Ganges. And those drivers, they steer water-related challenges. And then you can think about growing demand for water, but also something like extreme weather events and all the other issues that are related to that. And then those are then causing issues like and relations like water pollution related to human health, but also on ecological quality and water migration and conflict issues that may happen. So I think that because all those things are related, it's important to also look at the global commitments together. And here are 5 commitments on the screen. The 2 that I would like to focus on a little bit today, but not saying that the others are less important, but just to get the focus for today. It's about the Sustainable Development Goal and the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015. Both were set in 2015, by the way. And I think they're now approaching a period where it will be quite important to know and see if together we are able to achieve those objectives by the time that has been set to them. So 2030 is an important deadline actually for the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at the climate agreements, it switches a little bit between 2030 and 2050, also depending a bit on the commitments. You may have heard the last pledge from China that's focusing on 2060 to reduce a large part of their fossil fuel use. So country per country, there may be a slight difference between the target years that they're aiming for. Now, where are we at the moment? So this is a summary actually of SDG 6 for 2021. And as you probably all are aware of, SDG 6 is about water. There are different topics in there. So there are different objectives in there as well. I just picked out 2. This is the 641 and 642 objectives. One is on water use efficiency and the other one is on water stress. And actually what it tells you is that at the moment with the water use efficiency, there's good news in the sense that globally we have been able to increase water use efficiency by 10%. If you look at the other ones, then for example, transboundary cooperation, which is on the right bottom corner, only 24 countries have a good report on how they share, say, transboundary water resources, either lakes, aquifers, or rivers. So there's still also a lot of work to do. If you look at the 6th assessment report, so that's about climate change. I put on the screen here actually what came out of the report that just was published a couple of months ago. And I took out the part that is related to South Asia, or the bottom corner is a bit broader than South Asia, but to the region. And what you see in there are a couple of issues that you probably all know. One of them is about the glaciers that are declining and the permafrost is thawing. It's not news, but what this report is doing also, and that's maybe good to realize, it's an assessment and it's reviewing actually existing research. So it's not, say, introducing new research, it's actually assessing used research. And there, the terms high confidence or medium confidence or low confidence are quite important. In this case, for example, on the glaciers, there's high confidence, meaning that from all the literature that is there, they're all pointing on average in the same direction. So that's why they think that this announcement, that like glaciers are declining, is a change that they think you can put forward as high confidence. Then, if you concentrate a little bit more on South Asia, that's the whole of India. India, of course, like I said at the beginning, is quite large. But in India, what you see from this review is that heat waves and humid heat stress will be more intense and more frequent in the coming centuries. There, also because the area is so large, there's medium confidence. So not all research is pointing in the same direction. And the same is about the annual and summer monsoon precipitation. It's believed to increase, but again with medium confidence. Now, if we're looking a little bit towards the future, then this graph tells you a little bit how much CO2 emissions are going to lead to a certain temperature increase. So what is on the table since Paris is actually the 1.5 degree. So if you want to go to the 1.5 degree temperature increase as a maximum that we would like to allow on average at the globe, we should follow this SSP1 trajectory. And if we think that we can allow more than, say, 2.5 degrees or 3 degrees, then we're following this SSP5 to 8.5, so the more extreme one that is related to more carbon emissions. So important is that, of course, we would like to restrict actually the temperature increase on average. So we would not like to go to this top scenario, which is the top line here, and the business as usual. But we would like to go to the one with the high ambition, because that will allow us to reduce our, say, temperature increase to 1.5 degree. But where are we going at the moment? And this is the report of last year. There will be a report coming out also for this year. But what was projected on carbon emissions, and this is total carbon emissions, so it also includes the other trace gases, was that we would see a decrease for 2020. And that decrease would mainly be caused by the fact that we had less emissions coming from road transport. And of course, that had to do a lot with the corona crisis that we're still in. But I must say that listening and looking at the numbers that are coming out, I'm afraid that we will not continue to see this decrease, but that hopefully we will get to some leveling off. But I'm afraid that we're going in this direction. And that's not so good news, especially if those 1.5 degree global temperature rise is on the table, because with this increase, it will become much more difficult to achieve an agreement where we can maintain the increase in temperature rise under 2 degrees. Now, going a little bit towards the region, here are some challenges and some opportunities, because I do think it's quite important that if you talk about challenges, you should also talk about opportunities, because the opportunities are hopefully also giving a direction on where you can look for solutions in the future. I will not go into them into detail, but if you're interested in that, on the bottom of the sheet, you can find the chapter where this is coming from, and I have a few more slides actually coming from the same chapter. But what I wanted to show a little bit is the different SDGs. And like I said, it's not only about SDG 6, but we do think it's a very important one, but also on others that are important for the region of the Himalayas. And what is in here is actually the targets and the commitments of the different countries. And in the red box, you see what India has committed. Of course, this is a national commitment, so that may divert a bit between the different states or even parts of the states in India. So please take that into account. But you also see that the ambitions are quite big. I just give one here that is on, for example, the poverty hat, the present state, and this is coming from the reports of 2015 around. So at the start of the SDGs, it was almost 22. And what they would like to go for is 0. So in here, you see what the ambitions are of India as a state to achieve those sustainable development goals. Then on the climate change era, you had the national determined contributions. And here again in the red box is India. And what was done here in this table is to see what the different countries actually put in the reports that sent in to the UNFCCC on how they would like to contribute both to mitigation, but also to adaptation. And I think on the adaptation side, that's where I would like to ask your attention for a bit, because that's where I would like to continue on. So in the report of India, there are actually some concrete adaptation measures mentioned, and also how this could be financed. Now, this financing is again an important part because, again, they will discuss that in Glasgow as well. And so I think that both the ideas how to do that, but also the enabling conditions that you need, where financing is one of them, are quite important. So what was done in a study that I referred to earlier is that they looked at the future of the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, and they were looking at now what are possible scenarios. And then on those scenarios, how can you achieve such a scenario? A very important scenario would be to actually achieve prosperity in 2080 in the whole region. And then it was thought that there were two possible ways on how to get there. One was a pathway that was looking at large-scale sustainable development investments, which was regional cooperation. So that means also cooperation between the countries of the region. And another one was a more bottom-up investment with local and national cooperation. So those two different pathways were seen as possibilities to be there. And I think what's important in there is that you don't necessarily have to make a choice between the two pathways, but you can also look how you can use parts of the two pathways, because within a country, it could be, say, wise to see if one of the two fits better with the local conditions and also with the cultural background. So what the first pathway is about, which is about the large-scale investments, including regional cooperation, that's about creating centralized large-scale power. Or you can think then about hydropower and how you come to an agreement, like was made between Bhutan and India, in installing hydropower or building a dam with financing from one country, building a dam in the other country, and then sharing say the electricity coming from such a big asset together. What is important in there is that the institutions for governing the collaboration and cooperation in the region and also across, but also in the region, is essential if you want to achieve this pathway. So this international collaboration, but I also think that India is so big that the interstate collaboration is a quite important part to look at if you want to follow this pathway. Now, another pathway is a more bottom-up pathway, where you are looking at investments with cooperation and across multiple levels, and that's also government levels. And they're looking much more on small-scale, decentralized, local and national development actions. And in some cases, that could be a better way of progressing actually the development and increasing the quality of life in a certain area. Important there is a multi-level governance structure. So you have to have a good cooperation, for example, between the village, a county and the province, and then the national governments. But also you need to address local diversities. So taking into account is also in your national policies then that you are enabling local diversities is quite important. So following one pathway or another could also have implications for the way how you want to set up your national policies or your regional policies. Now, to make it a little bit more concrete, I also put a table in where you could think about actions that could support both pathways. And of course, that is quite interesting because then you can maybe, let's say, use the strength of both pathways without making a clear choice in one of the two. So actions here is, for example, to create food banks, to overcome a challenge like food security, but also to promote specific products that reflect local diversity. So that may increase food and nutrition security, but it may also increase livelihood conditions. So there are a couple of other actions there. Again, I will not go over the list. Please read them. And I'm convinced that the presentations will be shared with you. So have a good read if you're interested in those. I also put in the list there of actions to be avoided. And again, I will not go over all of them, but energy supply scarcity, a quite important part also in the region and becoming more and more important is the energy supply. So if you have inefficient management of water supply and health infrastructure systems. So that is a risk that you don't want to run into. So you want to make sure that this energy supply is in order. and you have to avoid actually actions that you take that will increase actually the scarcity of energy supply in an area or at certain times of the year or the day, because that may hamper your health infrastructure system and also a lot of other say infrastructure systems there. So if you then go a little bit to national policies, and here I show you a table coming from a study where we compared actually how well a certain policy could be used in climate adaptation. Because as you probably know, and you have seen from the earlier graphs, is that we don't know for sure where we are with climate change. There's a lot of uncertainty in there. So it could be that you want to have a flexible policy. And the different approaches that are being used are strategic spatial planning, scenarios, adaptation pathways, adaptive governance, and robust decision making. All of them are being used as national policies. And what we try to describe is the main characteristics in there. So what is the strength of a certain policy? And then a policy that is flexible and is maybe able also to overcome uncertainty is one that you would like to have if you're looking at climate adaptation. So what we did is we also looked at the different national policies that are in place. And again, in the red box, I highlighted India and looked at what the strengths could be of that policy. So from the NEPCC of India from 2008, we think that there is quite some institutional flexibility in that policy. Also quite some adaptive nature and scalability, and also on reflexivity. So we think that's a quite good policy to be used also in climate adaptation approaches. While the NDC, which is a national one, has much less institutional flexibility in there, but aiming, of course, on quite adaptive nature. But because it's a national policy, the scalability is much more difficult in there. So in that way, you can look at the different ways how also the different policies can play a role to help overcome the issues in climate adaptation. So the choice of the policy instrument that you're using can be important as well. And then adaptation itself, and that's about measures. Here I put a graph that gives you the frequency of, say, some strong temperature extremes. And what happens with climate change is that the new climate is shifting to the right in this case. So you get more extreme weather. So that also means that if you have an asset or you have the number of people that will be affected by a certain extreme will increase. So that asset will be damaged more often. Now, what you try to do with adaptation is actually that you have to consider if the risks that are increasing with the new climate, if they are acceptable or not. And if they're not acceptable, you have to start thinking, okay, until what level should I invest or should I change either my behavior or the assets to make this risk acceptable? So how far to the right would you like to move up acceptable risks? And this moving up of the acceptable risk to the right will also determine for a large part what measures you have to make and what investments you have to do to make the risks acceptable again. So some questions that you may face if you're thinking about that is, first of all, if, for example, drought and flood mitigation measures are complementary. So meaning if you're thinking about adaptation, are you also thinking about mitigation, so emissions of greenhouse gases? So can you increase the capacity of the landscape to take up certain extremes, so the sponge type of approach? Demand management, I think, is quite important. So can you change, for example, eating behavior, or can you change the way how people use fossil fuels, all things like that? So there are a number of other key questions that are in there as well. An important one is how do we share our waters now and in the future? And what is the quality of water related to that? So if you then, and I give the example here of scarcity-oriented risk, is what approaches could you do? So you can have a basin approach. You can look how you can cap the water use and the irrigation area. Because if you only cap maybe and introduce drip irrigation, it could be that the irrigation area will increase. So you want to look at how much water is being used, for example, by a certain sector to allow to overcome drought periods, or to allow another sector that also needs water to use that water. So increasing water productivity could be a way forward. The sponge capacity I already spoke about, but also alternative water supplies. Can you reuse water that's treated, or can you introduce desalinized water, or other ways of doing that? And like I said, combining drought and flood management is important. What I think what's sometimes forgotten is if you look at the agricultural side, that climate change is also shifting the timing of weather events taking place. And I do think that's quite important, that to realize that crops do have certain phases in which they are more sensitive to climate change than others. So I think water managers as well as irrigation institutes should take into account that those shifts are also taking place. So how can you overcome that? So to summarize a little bit, what are acceptable risks? How can you increase flexibility? Spatial planning is quite important, because we often see that if you want to introduce measures, you also need space there, and that's not always easy. We do think that if you want to introduce something, supporting policies, so looking at how policies can strengthen each other's objectives, is quite important. And we do think that linking opportunities is important. To come back a little bit to why it's then important to have this interdisciplinary and holistic approach is maybe a statement coming from the Secretary General of the United Nations. And that was about water. And what he was saying in July last year is that we have to work quite hard on SDG 6, which is water related, because water is at the basis actually of all the other SDGs as well. So if we are not able to forward the progress on SDG 6, so on water, it will become quite difficult to also make the progress that we need on all the other SDGs. So for that reason, they introduced this global accelerator framework, which has 5 pillars in there. One is on data and information, other is on capacity development, another one on innovation, and one on financing, and one on governance. And what we're trying to do at the moment to achieve those SDGs by 2030 is working on those 5 pillars of the Global Acceleration Framework. So like I said, another important one is the thing that's happening on SDG 13 actually, which is climate action. And that's happening this week and the coming weeks in Glasgow, and the outcome of that. Here is a cartoon that was published in one of the other COP meetings, and I do hope that we will not see the same thing happening this time as we have seen in some other big meetings, but that it will lead actually to tangible change. But then you also have this statement from Albert Einstein. And he's saying that if you want to solve the problems of the future, you should not use the same kind of thinking that we used to when we created those problems. So we really need to change on how we think about issues in there. I have one suggestion there, and that's actually coming from the health science, which is they're called implementation science. And why I think that may help is that if you look at a lot of different places, I do think that also in the water sector, implementation is quite difficult often. And I think we need actually a scientific approach towards why we're not able to speed up this implementation. And maybe the health discipline has a good approach to do that. And that is that health or the implementation science, it's a little bit different from clinical research, as they say, by the fact that what they do, besides looking, of course, at the innovations, they also look how to address barriers and facilitators to take up those evidence-based innovations. And I think that's what we also need in the water sector. So I think that that is an important part. And one of the things that I would like to mention is an initiative that also recently started, is the Adaptation Academy. And that academy is actually helping governments to at least monitor and report the different policies that they have. And I think you also need that to know if a policy is working out correctly, or if you should adjust the policy to achieve what you want to do. And I think combining this implementation science with new ideas how you can speed up the implementation with a system that helps you to monitor and adjust policies when you see that they're not delivering what you would like them to do, may help us to make a step forward. So my last sheet, I put some references in there of the material that I've used for this presentation. So you can look up if you're interested in more details about the presentation. So thank you very much for your attention.